So we have our facilitator, and the facilitator for this afternoon will be is no other person but Dr. Karouzos. Permit me if I don't get the spelling correct, the pronunciation correct, sorry. He is the head of publishing strategy, reviews, news and opinion for the Nature portfolio, working on the publishing strategy of commissioned content in the Nature portfolio of journals. Marius is an astronomer by training with a PhD in astrophysics and expertise in black holes and the galaxies they live in. He joined Springer Nature in 2016 as one of the launching editors of Nature Astronomy. Marius co-chairs the Springer Nature SDG 5 Gender Equality Working Group and the Springer Nature Women Employee Network. Marius is also a Springer Nature brand ambassador and a judge of the Nature Award for inspiring women in science. Ladies and gentlemen, please, I want you to show with your best emoji as we welcome to the microphone our keynote speaker for today, Dr. Marius Karouzos. You're welcome, sir. You have the microphone.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for being here today. Good afternoon. My name is Marius Karouzos. I'm head of publishing strategy for the reviews, news, and opinion content for the Nature portfolio journals. And today I wanted to talk to you about advancing open access, sustainability, and equity in Africa and beyond. Just a quick word about my background. I studied physics and astronomy for my undergraduate and my PhD. And after that, I spent a few years doing academic research in Germany and South Korea. And after that, I joined Springer Nature in 2016 to launch one of the Nature journals, Nature Astronomy, which published its first issue in 2017. In the last 3 years or so, I've joined the Nature Portfolio Publishing Strategy team, and this is the role that I'm currently in at the moment, and why I'm talking to you today about open access, sustainability, and equity. So this is a quote that I have here from our CEO, Frank Franken-Peters, about open access. And as he says, our goal is to drive a sustainable and equitable transition to open access, which retains trust and integrity at its core. As an industry and an entire research community, we need to work together to reach a fully open access future. This means that we have to consider how we move ourselves and our journals and our books to a future where every country, every institution, every researcher is able to take advantage of open access content published. So this is the things I would like to touch upon today in my presentation, and this includes open access and open science generally, sustainability and equity in publishing specifically, and then talk a bit more about what Springer Nature is doing in these fields, specifically Nature Portfolio's journey to open access, and finally I would like to close off with spending a bit of time around my advice in terms of getting published in the Nature portfolio, which I hope you will find interesting. So let's start with open access and open science. So I am sure that you're all familiar with open access, as it is essentially the way that we ensure that published content is made free to read, and it's also available to distribute, use, and reuse by anyone essentially. So the underlying sort of idea behind open science and open access specifically is that any research that is funded by taxpayers' money should be immediately available to everyone upon its publication. In that sort of new sense of or way of doing publishing, open access, the publishing model essentially means that it's shifting the cost of publishing from readers who previously may have paid a subscription to access content to the authors and their funders who now they have to bear the cost of the publication process. There are, of course, some obvious benefits in having open access. Both authors and their institutions can enjoy increased exposure, citations, and impact. And this is something that I will talk a bit more about in the next slides. It also promotes reproducible research and research integrity. And finally, it offers an equitable access to reading for authors without subscriptions. However, we have to also acknowledge that there are some challenges. It is, of course, more expensive for institutions with large publishing output. So if you need to publish many papers, it means you need to pay more to be able to do that open access. But also, it kind of indirectly encourages inflation of publications, especially in predatory publishing, because for not so great publishers, predatory publishers, the more of open access content they publish, the more money they make. So there's an incentive to essentially increase the volume of content that is being published. Finally, there is an inequity in terms of who has access to publishing open access, because for most models there is some cost that is borne by the authors. This essentially means that some authors that do not have the necessary funds might not have the ability to publish open access. However, we have a very obvious example of why open access and open research or open science is really something we want to be striving for and has led to great successes. And this is, of course, I'm talking about the pandemic and the COVID virus. During the pandemic, 2020, 2021, and so on, a lot of the content that was related to COVID and research that was published during that time was made freely available, was made open access, including data, including methods and protocols. And this meant that everyone around the world working on the same topic had access to all the knowledge that they may need for their own research. The obvious sort of result from that was within 18 months, we had developed vaccines and boosters and methods to fight this virus, which is, of course, unprecedented in terms of how quickly this was able to be deployed in the history, essentially, of scientific discovery. Through this process of making all this content free, around 500 million articles were downloaded related to COVID content, and more than 1 billion chapters were downloaded again through this initiative, which is really impressive numbers if you think about it. So if we think a bit more in more detail around open access and what are sort of the different ways that one can have to get open access for their publications, there are different models that I have tried to present here. And in the table, you can see sort of the four main ones that you probably have heard of already. So first of all, we have gold open access, and this is the case where an author has to pay a publication cost, an article processing charge, an APC, to publish their paper with usually a CC license. Then we have the green open access, and that usually means that the authors are allowed to self-archive a version of the published paper, usually after an embargo period. However, the problem is that the version of record, which is published in a journal or somewhere else, means that it's different from what is published as open access by the author themselves. We also have bronze open access, and that usually means that an article is published and then is made free, usually by the publisher, for a fixed amount of time. However, this does not have a CC license, which means that as a reader, you cannot take this content and republish it somewhere else or use some of the data and so on. So it's a very limited approach to making content available. Finally, we have diamond open access, and in that model, we have essentially journals that are funded by external sources. So we have, say, a funder or a consortium of funders who allocate an amount of money that covers the publication process, and therefore an author can go to that journal, publish their paper open access for free, essentially, for themselves, but the cost is then being borne by whichever funder or funders are funding the journal itself. So all of these models have merits and have things that sort of are advantages in terms of how they think around equity, for example, for readers and for authors. However, I just wanted to show you some data here on the left-hand side that shows you the volume of papers that are being published under different open access models. So you have gold shown in the yellow, then you have green shown in the sort of dark green, and bronze is shown in that sort of bronze color. And you can see essentially that the gold open access volume since 2013 has really skyrocketed and has increased steadily and almost exponentially over the last few years. On the other hand, if you look at the green and the bronze open access volumes of papers, they have remained more or less steady. There has been a bit of an uptick around 2019, 2020, but now we are seeing that in 2023 and 2024, there has been a drop in the volumes there. Now, there are good reasons why people are choosing Gold Open Access for them to publish their papers. The main one being that in Gold Open Access, the version of record, the very final piece of content that is being published, is the one that is being made free and is the one that is being shared as widely as possible and made available to everyone to read and use. This is very important, especially if you think about research integrity and reproducibility, because, for example, if there's a correction in the future on a specific paper that is published called open access, then this correction is being done on the version of record, which is then made freely available with a CC license. So all this information is in one place. So if a reader goes and finds this paper in the future, they will be able to know if there has been any corrections, if there has been any changes, where are the linked data and the final version of every sort of piece of research that is connected to that particular paper. However, open access is just a small part of what we call open science or open research. So open access really deals with papers and the publications that appear in a journal, but there is so much more when we're thinking around what it takes to do a research project. So we have things like the code that is used to make a project, perhaps the data that are being analyzed. We can think about metrics, protocols, methods. We can think about the peer review process itself, so maybe the comments that the referees gave to the authors before the paper was published. So all these things are actually part of the whole sort of publication process and sort of discovery process. And by making all this content actually free and accessible, there are some very important advantages. Of course, we are accelerating scientific discovery. We are improving reproducibility of results. We make it easier for others to actually build on results and on sort of experiments that have already happened to do their own work. And importantly, we are reducing duplication, especially of negative results. Overall, this means if you combine all this together, we get a fairer and more efficient research system for everyone. There has been a number of mandates or encouragement from funders around the world that supports open access and open science. And here on this slide, I have put some examples. So here you can have on the top left the mandate that was published a couple of years now back by OSTP, so from the federal government in the US, essentially mandating free access, public access to all content that has been funded by federal funders. We also have Plan S, which is much more European-centric. UNESCO themselves, they have recommended that open science is the way to go. And of course, there are a number of other African-based initiatives, like the one in South Africa, Open Research Africa, and so on, which are essentially in the same vein, supporting open access and open research. I like showing data, so I wanted to show you some more data here. And here I have looked specifically at the publication output for African-based researchers. And you can see here on the table on the left, these are from year 2016 all the way to the year 2024, the number of publications that have been published under an OA model, which is the sort of the top line. And then the second line has the content published subscription. And then in the rest of the lines are the 4 lines. You have a breakdown of open access papers in the different models that we have described. So I wanted to sort of pull out a couple of things here. So first of all, if you look at the overall total publication output from African-based researchers, there has been a growth of the volume, sort of 10% year-on-year increase in volume of content published. However, if you look at just the gold and the hybrid open access publications, then they are growing much faster. So they're almost growing double the rate as the overall output of publication output at 18% year on year. You can sort of see this in the plot that I have made on the right, where if you look at the gold open access, which is essentially the kind of the bronze line, you can see how it is growing really fast, and essentially it is driving the overall growth of publications from African-based researchers. However, there are some clear challenges when thinking about open access and open science. And here I have taken a few plots from a study that was communicated in a conference in 2024 by Wafula and Makaria, essentially specifically focusing on open access and open science challenges within the continent of Africa. So here you can see, first of all, on the bottom left chart, the pie chart, that more or less more than half of institutions in Africa, then this is based on a survey that was done from more than 100 academics, practitioners, and support staff, more than half of the institutions do not have a mandate for open access or open science. Moreover, if you look at the word cloud in the bottom right, you can see some of the key challenges that came up when people were asked why there is no more focus on open science and open access. And you can see very clearly here that we have a lack of funding, a lack of infrastructure, and also a lack of awareness. Now, all these things are very fundamental challenges that one has to think about when considering how open access and open science can grow around the world. And for that to happen, there's also a need for skills. So that is shown in the top right bar chart, the different skills that people have said are necessary to support open science and open research. And here you see things like data management and sharing, data visualization, open access publishing, and reproducible research practices. So there is still some way to go in terms of best supporting this transition to open access and open science. So before I move on to the next part of the talk, I just wanted to make sure that it is very obvious to me, and I hope to you as well, that us publishers have a very key role to play in supporting this journey to open access and open science. So essentially, by being able to support this transition, by opening up research, it increases its use and reuse, it speeds up scientific advances, and delivers efficiencies for research while also supporting collaboration, not only within different regions, but also within different disciplines, which is important. It's becoming increasingly important for today's grand challenges that we are facing across the planet, such as climate change and so on. And this very nicely brings me to the second part of my talk, which focuses on the sustainability and equity in publishing. When I think about sustainability, I mainly focus on the idea of the Sustainable Development Goals, which were put together by the United Nations around 10 years ago, and are defined in terms of the 2030 agenda. So these are goals that we are looking to accomplish in order to improve the quality of life around the world by 2030. And here there are 17 of them, and here they are grouped into large themes, which include things around our biosphere, for example, clean water or climate action, around our society, which includes things like no poverty, peace, justice, and strong institutions, or things like good health and good education. And finally, we have another tier, which is around economy, including reduced inequalities, for example. And finally, there's at the top, number 17, which is around strong collaborations for the goals. Unfortunately, and this may not be a surprise to many of you, the SDGs are not on track. Although there are many people around the world who are working very hard to support progress towards these goals, the majority of the work is still far behind where we would like it to be when it comes to these SDGs. So here, this is just a visualization focusing on SDG 16, which is peace, justice, and strong institutions. And you can see here the red color means that we are really not where we want to be in terms of the goals, and then green and yellow. Green is the best, obviously, so we are having significant progress. So as far as I can see, there's only one green place in the whole world. Most of our world is still in the red. And this is, I think, more or less true for most of the SDGs, if you look at that. So there's still much more work to do if we are going to succeed in this challenge set by the United Nations. So last year, towards I think it was September 2024, there was a Summit of the Future that took place in New York at the United Nations, where a number of sort of government officials, policymakers, publishers, scientists, and others came together to discuss the SDGs and where we are at the moment and what comes next towards that 2030 kind of milestone. And there was this pact for the future that was sort of an announcement that was made by the whole assembly there. And I wanted to kind of highlight one sentence here, which I think is very relevant to what we're talking about today. And that is, advances in knowledge, science, technology, and innovation could deliver a breakthrough to a better and more sustainable future for all. And this essentially talks to what is the function of the publishers and the academics that we support. By making sure that we are facilitating the scientific discovery and communicating then the results that come out of this process, we are directly supporting a more sustainable future for humanity. So what can publishers do for a sustainable future? I have had here three sort of buckets. The first one is around publishing content. This is the most obvious one. We want to take sort of your results, your publications of the knowledge that you are creating, and then disseminate it to the world, disseminate it as widely as possible. This is the very baseline of the thing. Then we can think about equity and access. How do we make sure that most people have access to what we publish? And how do we make sure that we maintain a role of curator within that ecosystem of knowledge creation and communication? Finally, we as companies, we as publishers need to also be role models in the way that we conduct our own business. And that can include things like research integrity and ethics, but also we need to advocate like things for as sustainability. How are we thinking about our own footprint on the environment and on the planet? And that is also part of a sort of responsible business perspective. Again, going back to the data, hopefully you find that interesting. Here I have plotted the output of the publications, both in journals and in books, coming from African-based institutions for the SDGs. So we can tag a particular piece of content, whether it is related to an SDG or not, and then we can see how the output of that kind of content is increasing with time. So on the left, we have global publications, so from all over the world, and you can see that the SDG-related content has been growing around 15% on average year on year. If we look now on the right, which is from African-based researchers, we can see that this growth is actually much higher, is at 17% year on year. And you can see essentially at the very top, the sort of dark blue line, that is content related to SDG number 3, which is good health and well-being. But then the second most in volume is zero hunger, climate action, then goes quality education, and affordable and clean energy. So these are all topics that African researchers are really interested about and are currently publishing content in. We are also able to look and compare the impact that SDG-related publications generate compared to non-SDG-related publications. So SDG-related content has been cited between 40 to 60% more than non-SDG content published in the same year. Similarly, if we look at the impact in terms, for example, say, news articles or discussions on Twitter and social media and so on, we see that SDG-related content generates 2 or 3 times more sort of interest in social media in the community than non-SDG content. This essentially shows you that a lot of researchers are thinking about the SDGs, and this kind of science and research is creating a lot of impact. So let me now take a minute to discuss a bit about equitable access for authors and readers to publish content. So obviously there are a number of different stakeholders that are involved in the process of creating science, starting of course from governments and funders who provide the money, to researchers, institutions and universities who employ people to do research, to of course publishers who take that research and publish it in the form of papers, and so on and so forth, including policymakers, for example, who then take the research and use it to make decisions. So we can think about equity in terms of two large buckets. One is equity for readers, so who can actually read the content that is being published, and then equity for authors, which is who can actually publish content, for example, through open access models. So for equity for readers, we have a number of different sort of initiatives that are supporting this principle. The most famous one is Research for Life, which essentially looks at countries that have low income in the developing world, and then they provide ways for them to have access to content that is behind, say, a paywall that would require otherwise a subscription, and Research for Life makes sure that this content is made available to them. There are other institutions and initiatives. I have put here a couple of them. INASP and IFL are two of them. Again, similar principle, non-for-profit organizations that support the dissemination of knowledge. But also I have put here the symbol for open access, because obviously the more content is published open access, the more equitable the access to content is for readers, because it is free for everyone to read. On the flip side of things, we have the equity for authors. So how do authors get access to publish things in journals? And here I've put a few things down. I've put waivers. So that's a very powerful way that we have as publishers to support authors who don't have funds. We have Diamond OA, which I already explained. And also we have transformative agreements, which is essentially large-scale, usually national-scale agreements with publishers that allows researchers, individual researchers, to publish open access without cost. Oh, here we are. So let me now move on to the next part of my talk, which will focus on Springer Nature specifically and the Nature portfolio, and it is around, first of all, open science and sustainability. So within Springer Nature, we have championed open access and open science for over 20 years now. At the moment, last year, 44% of all our primary content was published open access, which means more than or around 1.5 million research articles and close to 200,000 open access articles published in 2023. Our portfolio includes more than 600 open access journals, 3,000 open access books, and again, close to 3,000 journals in a hybrid portfolio where you can publish either open access or follow the subscription route. 53% of our journal articles relate to SDGs, that was published open access in 2023, and we supported more than 2.5 million authors to actually publish open access with us. We are exploring new ways of supporting open access and equity of access for authors, including our transformative agreements. And Springer was actually the first publisher to offer an open access option to its subscription journals. I already sort of talked a bit about the fact that open access articles and books are used more. Here are some numbers for you based on our own analysis. So our authors get around 2 times more citations for their articles and more than 2 times much more citations for books if they publish open access, and they get 5 to 10 times more altmetric attention. This means attention in terms of news article, social media discussions, and so on if they publish open access. Content that is published open access is downloaded more, 6 times more for articles, 10 times more for books. And then, of course, there is that very close link between the SDGs that I mentioned and open access, and 65% of this were published open access, gathering more than 3.1 billion downloads, which is really impressive. So what are some of the ways that Springer Nature is able to support open access and equity in our publishing industry? So I mentioned waivers, and we supported more than 26 million euros in waivers in 2023. We're expanding our transformative agreements across the world, and I will show you a map in a minute. We are piloting a tiered pricing for our open access journals. So some of our open access journals offer different price points depending on where the authors are based. We also are looking into new business model. We have our curious journals where in principle, if a paper is well structured and written, then it can be published open access without a fee. And of course, we have a number of diamond open access journals where, as I mentioned, a funder or a consortium of institutions are supporting open access centrally, and therefore researchers do not have to pay APC individually. Finally, I wanted to mention the Nature Fund. So this is a fund that we have put together to support lower income and lower middle income countries to publish open access within the Nature portfolio. And I will show you some examples of that in a minute. So this is a map that shows you some of the transformative agreements that we have already signed around the world. You can see that there's, of course, a very dense sort of population of agreements within Europe where things started off. But now we're expanding in the US, in Africa, in Asia, and of course also in South America. In the US, we have agreements in Egypt and South Africa, and probably more of them are being discussed as we speak. And having these transformative agreements has really made a difference for the countries that actually have them. So you can see that there has been a strong increase of open access publishing in countries where there is a transformative agreement, more than around 70% in some cases. And you can see here specifically South Africa is shown in the bottom of this bar chart, where before the agreement, around 10% of publication was published open access, whereas after the agreement, that percent was increased to around 80%. Impressively, if we look on the other side of the equation, which is around access for readers, for our open access content, we have seen a 10-time increase in usage of that content from readers in Africa and 11 times reading from readers in Asia. So again, that kind of speaks to the power that open access has in sort of democratizing access to publications. I wanted to finish off this bit discussing about sustainability at Springer Nature specifically, and I want to remind you that I had these three buckets, which was around sort of publishing content, sort of equity, access, and people, and then finally the planet. So for publishing, we have been publishing a lot of content in the SDGs. We recently published our 1 millionth sort of art piece of content related to the SDGs. And we have a number of initiatives. More than half of our journals actually are publishing SDG-related content as a large part of their output. And we have a number of other initiatives that support sort of the dissemination of that content to people that actually make decisions, like policymakers and sort of decision makers within governments. In the second pillar, we have the people and we have equity as a concept. And here I am thinking about not just, of course, our internal people, so the employees of Springer Nature, but also sort of the communities that we serve, you as our authors and as our readers. And we have a number of initiatives that are supporting us and you to become more equitable. We as publishers are advocating for equity in publishing and for thinking around the SDGs and so on. Finally, as a company, we're also thinking about the planet. We have made a pledge to be carbon neutral, net zero, emissions by 2040. And we are thinking very carefully about things, for example, like how much are our employees traveling around the world, so airfares and so on. How do we minimize our carbon footprint? How do we make sure that we work with vendors who are sustainable and are also thinking about the planet? So this is really a large part of how we sort of think ourselves as role models of the things and the behaviors that we want to see more widely adopted by our communities and by other companies in the industry. So let us shift now to the Nature portfolio, and this is my home. This is where I've been working in for the last 8 years. So I wanted to make sure that I cover sort of our own journey to open access and open science here as well. So, as you may know, Nature itself, our flagship journal, was actually published for the first time in 1869. So we celebrated our 150th year anniversary a few years back. And then it has had a very sort of long history of essentially changing and sort of adapting some of the new ways of working within the publishing industry. So, for example, it took us more than 100 years almost to make peer review as a standard way in how papers are assessed within Nature, which is quite interesting. I also wanted to point out from this timeline that in 2016, Nature Communications, our other flagship journal, became fully OA. So currently it's one of our biggest fully OA journals in Spring and Nature overall. We also introduced things like reproducibility checklists. We introduced double anonymous peer review, data availability statements in code deposition and peer review along the line, all things that are essentially components of what I called open science previously. A major milestone was in 2021, where we introduced the opportunity and the option for our authors to publish gold open access in the Nature hybrid journals. Since then, the percentage of open access content in the Nature hybrid journals has increased quite significantly. We are now around 50% of all our primary content in the Nature hybrid journals being published open access. How can you as an author publish with the Nature portfolio? You have essentially three different options. If you want to publish open access, you can do so either as gold open access within our fully OA portfolio and our hybrid journals by paying a fee. Or if you belong to an institution that is part of a transformative agreement, then you would be able to publish open access for free because your institution or your nation would be essentially covering the costs centrally. However, there's always the opportunity to publish subscription. This means that there is no cost for the author. And this, of course, relates to our subscription and our hybrid journals. Although then the content is published behind a paywall, which means that the reader would then have to have a subscription to be able to access the content that you publish with us. As promised, I wanted to just mention again our Gold Open Access Fund for the Nature portfolio, which is meant to support open access publishing in the Nature hybrid journals for authors that are based in lower and lower middle income countries around the world. So to define the list of countries that fall under this category, we use the World Bank classification, and you can see the list of countries there, and you can of course see that there is a number of African countries that are represented there. This means if you are submitting an article to one of our hybrid journals and you meet the editorial criteria and you are successful in the peer review process, then your article will automatically be published open access without any cost to you. And we have examples that this happened, and I'm showing you here 4 papers, recent papers that were published through this scheme from African-based institution authors, 3 from Nature Medicine and 1 from Nature Human Behavior, and there are a couple more that are about to be published and should appear online soon. And here we see countries represented as DR Congo, Rwanda, Ethiopia, and Nigeria. So as part of Spring and Nature, the Nature portfolio as well has 3 key priorities that we propose are part of our open science roadmap. The first one has to do with the right infrastructure. How can we support our authors to follow open science practices? The second one is growth opportunities. How can we make sure that we invest in services and ways that our authors then can use to deploy more of this open science kind of ways of working? And finally, how can we incentivize and recognize that? So how can we make sure that if an author does choose to publish open access or does choose to follow an open science practice, how do we showcase that on our platforms? So the end game in terms of thinking about this is essentially a transformation of how we look at the publication. So at the moment we have one publication, which is the paper. It can be published open access as a whole, and then within the paper you may have data as part of a table. You may have a code that underlies the way that the analysis was done or particular methods, but these are all encapsulated in one sort of kind of black box, which is the publication. Instead, what we see as the future of how open science might work and how we might be able to facilitate that is by creating a network of publications. This means we would have the paper, so the written kind of summary of the research outputs at the center, but this would then be connected with many different ways that combined give you the output that you are publishing. And this is the protocol, the code descriptor, data descriptor. It can be the peer review outputs, it can be a protocol, it can be the preprint itself, and all this together then creates a sort of a group of outputs, scientific outputs, that then essentially support things like reproducing whatever result you have in the paper, and so on and so forth. And this could very much look like a paper that we have currently on our web pages, but then you would have individual links, potentially with individual DOIs for these different individual scientific outputs, and everyone landing on this page of the article would be able to get access to each one of this sort of subunits of the scientific publication, and use this as they need to for their own needs and for their own experiments and research. So in the last 5 minutes or so of my presentation, I want to now give you a few tips and advice on how I think one can get published in the Nature portfolio. And to do that, I wanted to start first of all by explaining to you what the Nature portfolio is. So essentially, we are an ecosystem of journals, and we see ourselves as a leading partner for research that shapes the world. We have within the Nature portfolio different journals and different portfolio of journals that have different editorial models, they have different business models, and also they have different sort of editorial criteria. So starting at the left of the table, we have our NPJs, which is short for Nature Partner Journals, and these are operating with an external system of editors. There are 46 of them. They have published around 4,000 papers last year, and they publish both primary research and non-primary research, so reviews, news, and opinion content. The scope is fairly narrow individually, and they are fully open access, but offer waivers. Then moving on to a mixed editorial model, so this means a combination of internal editors, full-time editors, and external editors. We have our communication journals and our EMBO journals, which is the European Molecular Biology Organization journals. We have in total 12 of them that published around 5,000 papers last year, and their scope is from medium to broad. I also want to point out that the EMBO journals are participating in our tiered APC pilot. So if you were to submit and successfully publish with them, then you'll be able to benefit from a lower APC potentially, depending on which part of the world you are submitting your paper from. We then have our Nature Communication Journal, which is, as I mentioned, fully open access and is operated exclusively by in-house editorial teams who are themselves have PhDs and are sort of experts in their own fields. Last year, Nature Communication published around 10,000 articles, and it covered the full spectrum of disciplines and science. Again, Nature Communications has a very active waiver program. Moving on then, we have our Nature Reviews journals, which is our subscription journals, again with in-house editors, which however only publish reviews, news, and opinion content. So they do not publish any primary content. And the majority of the content that is being published in those journals is by invitation. So our editors spend their time to figure out who are the experts in a particular field, and then invite them to write content for us. We then have our Nature Research journals, which are hybrid journals with in-house editorial teams that essentially publish both primary and RNO content, and they have sort of medium scopes. So Nature Astronomy, which was the journal where I started from, is one of those Nature Research journals. Finally, Nature is our flagship journal. It covers all disciplines like Nature Communications, but it is a hybrid journal. So both for Nature and the research journals, you would have the opportunity, if you were to submit to us, to publish either open access by paying an APC or publish a subscription without any cost. So this is some examples of content that has been published by Nature, and I will not spend too much time here. This is some examples from the Nature magazine. So Nature also publishes a lot of journalistic content. We employ some of the best science journalists and editors in our communities, and they cover a number of different topics every week in the Nature magazine section. We have the Nature research journals, the Nature reviews journals, and then moving on to our fully OA journals, we have Nature Communications, the Communication Journal Series, and the NPJs. So these are journals that are very much community focused. They have external editors, but nevertheless adhere to the same high editorial quality and integrity standards of the Nature portfolio. The important thing is that all these journals are working together and are collaborating in many different ways, and this includes things like collections and open calls for papers, but also our transfer service, where if you submit your paper in one of those journals and for some reason gets rejected, then you can very easily transfer that paper to one of the other journals within the portfolio very quickly, and you don't need to do any work or wait for this new submission to happen. So in the last piece of my talk, I will quickly talk to you about what I think makes a great paper. And this is some of the things that you may want to think about when submitting a paper to the Nature portfolio. So obviously you need to have good science, and that is a very important thing. But on top of the good science, you also need to have good writing and good plots. And combined together, these three things make for a great paper. A great paper should be the celebration and the culmination of work, of a project, which can be big or small, but it should be at the end point of this project where you have had your results and then you are ready to report on what the outcomes were. Any great paper needs to be written with the same attention to detail and passion as the research that underlies it. And of course, you should also keep in mind that when a great paper is written, it needs to be written in a way that is also something that can be read, used, and enjoyed by other people, because this is the main point. You are writing a paper in order for others to be able to enjoy it. Finally, a great paper shouldn't be written and published just because one needs to extend their CV or have a longer list of publications. And importantly, if you are writing a paper and you feel very bored and you feel this is a chore, then most likely this is the same feeling that your readers are going to have as well. So keep that in mind when writing a paper. It is important to know your audience, and this means you need to understand what is the prior knowledge that you are assuming, what it is that you need to include in your introduction, for example, how much context do you need to provide in order to make sure that your audience will actually understand what it is that you're doing and how you are reaching the results that you are reporting. It is also very important to be realistic. Not every paper will disprove Einstein or be the next Nobel Prize worthy theory, but at the same time, you also need to be very honest in what you are achieving with this paper. Oftentimes, as an editor, I saw examples where someone would promise great things in the abstract, but then when I went on to read the main part of the text, I would see that actually nothing of the sort was actually included in the paper. And that, of course, is a problem. I also am writing here that you are allowed to speculate, but it is important that you make clear which part of your paper is actually a direct outcome of your research and the experiment that you did versus what it is that you are speculating, or what is some of the the ideas that you are putting forward that are then a secondary product of the research that you produced. Everyone is really busy. Authors are very busy, referees are very busy, editors are very busy, and importantly, readers are super busy. So essentially, when we're thinking about an impactful paper, it is those papers that are actually read by at least one other person that is not part of your author list. So to convince someone, a reader, to spend their hard-earned time to read your paper, you need to make sure that you make as much of the work easy as possible for the reader. You need to make sure that you get the key information across as efficiently and as usefully as possible. This, of course, starts with your title, right? You are competing for your readers' time. You need to capture their attention very quickly. The best way to do this, you need to have the news in the title. This means your title needs to be informative. It needs to be focusing on what it is that what is your main takeaway point from the paper. I often see it as an editor, authors like to use question marks in the titles. They're asking a question. This is usually a wrong tactic because oftentimes what you want from a title is to give you the answer, not ask a question. Similarly, you don't want to use acronyms, you don't want to use abbreviations or jargon in the title again, because if a reader goes to your paper and looks at the title and says, I don't understand what this is about, then most likely they're just going to skip it and go to the next paper. And in this way, you have lost a reader. Finally, I encourage people to try not to be funny or witty with their titles. There is a very real language barrier because your audience obviously is very much global. And oftentimes when you are being funny or witty, you are doing that at the expense of clarity. So again, I advise to prioritize including information in the title rather than making the title more catchy. The abstract is probably the most important part of the paper. This is the first thing that someone will read when they decide whether they want to read the actual paper or not. In many cases, although one should not do that, readers would read the abstract and then decide whether to cite a paper or not just based on the abstract. This means that the abstract is really, really important. Again, you are competing for the reader's time. You need to make the abstract as accessible as possible. What I often see in abstract is that people spend most of their abstract, like 90% of the abstract, just explaining results, or in some cases their methods and their results. This is a problem. You need to offer first context. What I recommend is 40% should actually be an introduction and a context. Where was the field at the time when you wrote this paper? What was the open question that you were trying to address with this paper? What were the missing pieces of the puzzle that this paper is coming in to explain? Once you put this in place, then you go on and you discuss your results. The method is usually not that important unless the paper itself is a method paper. But if this is not the main part of the paper, then you really shouldn't spend too much time on the method. I use this tool or I use this software. This is not as important. The key thing then is to go to your results. What are the main results? What is the main information that your reader will take out of this paper at the end? Finally, before you conclude your abstract, you want to have 1 or 2 sentences that explain why these results are important. So first you give the introduction and the context, then you say this is my results, and finally you make this easy for the reader. You don't wait for them to think why this is important, you tell them why it is important. And then this creates essentially a self-contained sort of mini paper in the abstract that will convince the reader to then go on and actually download the full paper and read it in detail. Finally, once you've managed to bring in your reader into the paper, then of course you need to organize your paper in a way that makes sense and makes it, again, easy for the reader. What I generally recommend is before you start writing a paper, just have a list of bullet points. What are the main things you want to cover? What are your main arguments? What are the main results? And then you use this bullet list to then flesh out the paper around these bullets. Importantly, you should be able to guide your reader as you go along. You can use things like signposting language, saying in this section we will do this and this, or now we're moving on to discuss that or the other. Having the right captions in your figures. This really helps readers to kind of jump from one thing to another. If they don't have time to read the whole thing from top to bottom, they can quickly scan the text and find the sentence that allows them to pinpoint where they are, and then they can read the one thing that they're interested in, and then they can leave very quickly. And this means that you make their life as easy as possible. So this is just a very quick visual representation of the process of submitting a paper to a Nature journal that has internal editors, in-house editors. And essentially what happens is once you submit the paper, the editor is going to read the paper and make an assessment. And if they find the paper meets the editorial criteria, then it's sent out to review. The editor will help you sort of navigate that peer review process with external referees. And then once the paper is accepted, then the editor will work with you to improve the title, improve the abstract, improve the figures and so on, before the paper is finally accepted, and then it's sent to production and eventually published. Of course, within the Nature portfolio, we have other ways to promote content and make it more widely accessible through our press office, through our social media, through cross-amplification in other journals, and so on and so forth. So I've spoken a bit longer than I wanted, but I want to finish with this list here, which is essentially what I see as a list of recommendations of how you can get involved with what we do at Springer Nature and the Nature portfolio specifically. And this is essentially engage, educate, write, and submit. So I've put here some links. For example, first of all, we have the Springer Link and Nature platform. So you can go on there and find open access content, open the content you have access to, and read. I encourage you to look at Nature masterclasses. We offer a lot of them online, and especially through Research for Life, you can have access to these masterclasses for free. And this can include things like training for peer review, training for writing grants, training for writing papers, and so on and so forth. There are Nature conferences that happen both online and in person. And again, I encourage you to take a look at those. Perhaps you find something that is interesting to you. We have the Springer Nature research communities. These are community-led sites where split by disciplines, and there you can make an account and you can participate in ongoing discussions. You can write posts about your own research or about something that is relevant to what is happening at the moment in your community, and you can in that way engage with the community, not just the local one, but the global one as well. Finally, once you have a piece of publication that you would like to submit to us, we have a tool that helps you find which is the right journal for that publication, and we call that the Journal Finder, and I have the link there. And also, you are very welcome to actually talk to our editors, especially for the Nature portfolio. We have in-house editors. You can reach out to them, send an email, and get in touch and sort of see what are the opportunities that you may have to be involved in some of the content that we publish or some of the initiatives that we drive as journals. So I thank you very much for your attention. I know that there was a lot of content and information in this presentation. I hope you found it very useful, and I'm very happy to answer any questions or hear your thoughts. Thank you very much.
I've had a wonderful time in class. We've had a facilitator talking for about 56 minutes, and I believe that we have people who have questions. So if you have questions, I will pick about 2 or 3. Dr. Marius, I want to please suggest if we can just pull at least 2 and then take the question like that, so that we'd have 3. Hello, sir.
Yes, I'm happy to answer 2 or 3 questions.
Okay. Thank you so much. Okay, let's have Esono Emmanuel Allen. Please unmute your microphone and ask your question. Okay. Esono. Okay. Maybe can I have
I'm with you, sir. I've jumped up.
Okay.
Hello, sir.
Yes, you can go ahead, ask your question, sir.
My question is because I want to ask a question concerning the low-income country, because most of the time when we want to publish in something like Elsevier, Springer, they do demand high amount of money from us. For example, now I went to publish some years ago, about last year or upper year, one journal in Springer. They were demanding about almost $1,400 from us. How can we do, since we are low-income nation, how can we do to get access to those waivers for publications?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your question. So this the process depends on the journal. So for example, I can talk to you about the fully open access journals for the Nature portfolio. So there you can actually submit a request for a waiver to the handling editor of your paper, and then they will be able to facilitate you and guide you to the right place where you need to actually request that. This has to be done before the paper is actually accepted, and then most likely you would be able to get a waiver. As I mentioned, if you do submit a paper and get accepted in the Nature hybrid journals, then if you are coming from a low-income country, then that automatically will be published open access without any cost. You don't need to do anything. I cannot comment about Elsevier or other journals because in that case, the sort of the process might be slightly different. But the idea is that whomever you are in contact with when you're submitting your paper, before it actually gets accepted, this is the right time to send a request and say, look, I need a waiver. Can you please help me and guide me to the right place to request one?
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Eson. Let's have 2 questions, then after that we'll now take 2 more questions and then we'll be done. Can I have Mr. Jacob Shaibu? Then immediately after Mr. Jacob, Mr. Jimo will ask question. I don't know whether it's Mr. or Mrs. Jimo Fatima will ask question. Let's have the questions together so that Dr. Marius will just help us answer them together. Then
but
we'll
I've
proceed.
been on the queue since for a question, and it's an experience I want to share.
Thank you very much. I don't know. Am I audible?
You are audible, sir. Please, can you go ahead,
Thank
sir?
you. I'm Dr. Jacob Shaibu. I want to ask these questions. Part of the question somebody have just asked it because of last 2 weeks, I wrote a journal to one of the the cost of it was so high that I could not be able to publish it. Now, my question is that, is there any organization that we will be able to register with that will help us to waive some of us that are from less, can I say, a less privileged country, that because from the lecture we can see about the percentage of journal from Africa is so low. Is there any organization that we can be able to, can I say, partner with, or whatever that will, all these things will ease for us so that we'll be able to put our impact on it? That is my question, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jacob. Can we have Mrs. Is it Jim or Fatima? Can we have you ask your question?
Yes, hello everyone. So my question is, I want to ask that what is the duration for someone to publish a paper? For example, I finished my master's program around February last year, and I wanted to publish the research outcome, but Nigerians, our supervisor are pending it due to one reason or the other. So I'm seeing like the duration is now kind of like a year after. Can I still publish on my own? Or what's the duration after finishing your research and publishing it? That's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I can start with the last question, since that I remember that more freshly. So I think there is no particular sort of timeline in terms of when you can publish your research. I think the main thing to consider is whether the result of your research is still sort of novel. Of course, if you publish if you have a result from your master's degree or your PhD degree or whatever, and then someone else in the meantime, while you are waiting to publish, produces the same result, and they are sort of faster to submit it to a journal, then this creates a problem, because obviously then someone else will publish it first before you get the opportunity to do so. So we encourage people to sort of be as quick as possible. So if you have an interesting result, you want to submit it as quick as possible, so that you make sure that you are the first one to sort of be able to show that this is your own sort of result. And then, of course, then there is a time that is needed from the point of submission until it gets kind of published in the journal. And that time depends, of course, on the different journals and sort of how many referees they might ask for opinions when they're doing the peer review process and so on. But in terms of what you're asking, the direct question is that there is no time limit. If the research that you're doing and the output of your research is still relevant, then it can be published anytime. But it may be that others also work on the same field, and of course that creates a sort of competition in terms of time.
Okay.
And also,
Thank you.
I will address the other question we had, which regarded, again, sort of the cost of publishing and whether there are any organizations that one can join to be able to support that process. I am not aware of any organization that actually support the APCs in a sort of in a global way, like the one that you're describing. But I think the process of waivers is essentially the best way that publishers have in order to support sort of researchers from countries sort of in the developing world. I think the other thing I mentioned was this tiered APCs, and I think someone also mentioned in the chat sort of discounts for APCs. These can vary between different journals and different publishers, but these are sort of the main tools that we have at the moment to be able to do that. Except if you find a journal that is, for example, a diamond open access journal, in which case you will be able to publish your paper for free, open access, because an institution or a funder is then subsidizing that journal. So this is a matter of doing your research and seeing if there are any journals that are relevant to your research, and then submit to those.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. Can we just have the last two questions? Dr. Uzoma Odua, and after you're done, I think Chinyere Lillian will just ask the question. That will be our last question for today, sir.
Thank you
so
very
much. You
much.
have the mic.
Thank you very much. I'm Dr. Uzoma Odua from University of Lagos. Thank you. I enjoyed the program. I had an ugly experience with nature hazard. It has to do with this preprint. So at the point when I wanted to submit my article, I noticed that something popped up whether I would prefer to have a preprint, and I selected yes. And it published a preprint alongside at the point that I made the submission. But surprisingly, the paper was rejected, that it was more of plagiarism, and they cited the preprint. And I objected, but the editor just didn't respond. So what do you have to say about preprints? That's one. Then the time it takes for papers to be published is another challenge. Is there any form of time frame, that a timeline that, oh, if it exceeds so and so time, then it's expected that the editor should be able to say, okay, let's just either take a decision on this paper? Because I had another bitter experience with this scientific report. After the reviewers has actually said it should be accepted, the editor had a contrary opinion and said that it does not match the, it does not align with the focus of the journal. So I was wondering, because it's expected that even before the paper, is sent out to reviewers, the editor must have gone through the article, before sending it out to reviewers. But the editor did that, reviewers responded, I made my own what's it called, amendments, and after all said and done, it was at the last point when I was just waiting for a decision. That was when the editor just responded that that he's sorry that the paper does not actually align with the focus of that scientific report. So I want to know, one, how do we escalate when there are issues like this? Thank you.
Okay, sir. The next person, please, can you ask your question so that we'll have our facilitator answer the both questions? Thank you. Okay, Chizoba Obikwelu. Okay, let's have Runke Adedunta.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Runke Adedunta. Please, can you hear me very well?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
All right, I listened to the presenter. My own observation was that when Mr. Amaro was presenting, he was talking more about nature and all of that. And that seems to relate more to the science area. I belong to the humanities. So I want to ask, what chances do we have as a writer in that end? So all I'm saying is science area and all that. So I just want more clarification. And part of the question has been asked by the last speaker concerning submitting your your article to Outfit, and then after it has been delayed for a while, you just receive message to say, oh, it's not aligning with their own area. So you're being delayed, the paper has been there, you're not even sure whether somebody has copied what you have done. So it calls for a check. So those are the two questions I would like to ask. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. First, for Dr. Zoma, in terms of the preprints, this is something that I find a bit surprising. I mean, we are very supportive of preprints, and we would never sort of judge the novelty of a paper based on something that has already been published as a preprint, unless this is, I mean, we are encouraging our authors to publish their papers as preprints during the submission process. So this should not be an issue when sort of judging the novelty of the paper. I am not sure if the discussion was around your submitted paper sort of being sort of similar to another preprint of some other author. If that was the case, of course, this is more difficult to comment, because if that is the case, then obviously then there is some concern about novelty. But in terms of your own preprint, that should not play a role in the decision process. Then the second question you had was around sort of escalation and sort of the paper being rejected at the very end of the process. This again seems a bit strange to me. I am not working on scientific reports directly, but I would say, because scientific reports also has some in-house editors that are handling some of the papers and sort of some of the processes, I would say that this would be the people probably that you want to escalate any questions you might have, and I can look for the link to put it in the chat, and you can take a look. The only thing I can think of that could potentially relate to this is if you submitted a paper to a specific open call, like an open collection, and maybe there was an issue in terms of alignment of the paper with the collection that you were submitting to. But again, if I don't know the specifics, it's difficult for me to comment. But generally speaking, there are places where you can escalate sort of and ask a question if something strange is happening. I will put the link in the chat. Then I wanted to go to Ms. Ronke and her question. So in terms of the humanities, actually, of course, the Nature portfolio is predominantly sort of publishing in the space of natural sciences and STEM, but we have been expanding quite significantly in also the humanities in things like, for example, social science, psychology, and so on. So there are a few journals in the portfolio that are now catering to this type of research. So depending, of course, again, on the type or the specific discipline that you are working in, I would encourage you to take another look at the journals that we have and see if there is a potential overlap there.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Marius. We are so grateful. I would like to hand over the mic to Dr. Wadzani Dauda to give us the vote of thanks. Thank you so much. Doctor, you have the mic.
All right. Yes, Dr. Marius, thank you so much, sir. It's been awesome. I mean, taking the discussion from not just the open access, the future of publication, but you went further to give some very insightful tips on how to structure a manuscript. And I mean, you went really way beyond. And the interesting thing was how you were able to balance all of those things within this very short time. And thank you so much. Thank you for squeezing your time again. You know, the time difference from where you are, and majority of the participants back home here are from West Africa, East Africa, and other parts of Africa. Then we have other countries. But thank you so much for being around. And we look forward to having more interesting engagement subsequently. So we sincerely appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate the invitation.
Yes.
And I hope to interact with you again in the future.
Yeah,
everyone. Thank you.
Yes. And thanks to all the participants. I think at a point to about 230 something thereabouts. So thank you for squeezing your time and coming around. We do appreciate everyone. And I think I'll hand it back to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for that vote of thanks. And for everyone who has joined us today, I believe it's been an amazing time interacting on this platform. We hope to see you again next time as we have more awesome and wonderful session in the future. So thank you so much, everybody. Dr. Marius, we are so grateful. And everyone who is on this platform, we are so grateful. Thank you and have a wonderful day ahead.